So, today we're once again gonna go ahead with cholesterol. No, we're actually indeed gonna go ahead with cholesterol, but something that I do have to do is get my filtery thingy thing. So the quote-unquote problem that I'm having with this article is that it is so immensely fucking difficult for me to go through. It is insane. It really is. I don't want to say that it is just not worth it, because I believe that it might be worth it. So I'm just gonna go through it anyway. You know, there's only a few things up to this point that I haven't gone through after I've started it. Just because, I thought, well, it's not going to work out quite well, you know, because it is just a pain in the ass for me. This is also not that great for me, to be honest. It's not like the most pleasure that I'm having going through this. But I mean, if I'm able to help somebody, if I'm able to just get something out that somebody now knows and would have not known without me, then it is pretty cool. But yeah, we're going to see. And I'm going to go ahead. And I'm probably not going to add too much to it because I don't have too much to add. So it's basically, I think, just going to be reading or something. And I hope that I'm going to do a good part at that. The sign or sine qua non of atherosclerosis is the presence of sterols in the arterial wall, macrophages. Sterols are delivered to the arterial wall by the penetration of the endothelium by an ApoB-containing lipoprotein, which transports the sterols. In other words, unless an ApoB-containing lipoprotein particle violates the border created by an endothelium cell and the layer it protects, the media layer, there is no way atherogenesis occurs. The more I know. We know that the most successful pharmacologic interventions demonstrated to reduce coronary artery disease are those that reduce LDLP and thus delivery of sterols to the artery. So why does having an LDLP of 2000 nanomole per liter, which is 95th percentile, increase the risk of atherosclerosis to relative to, say, 1000 nanomoles, I guess, or nmoles per liter, 20th percentile? In the end, it is a probabilistic game. The more particles, not cholesterol molecules within the particles and not the size of the LTD particles you have, the more likely the chance a LDLP is going to ding an endothelial cell, squeeze into the subendothelial space and begin the process of atherosclerosis. So, yeah. There is some evidence that particle for particle, LPA, is actually even more atherogenic than LDL, though we have far fewer of them. I see, and I just don't have to forget about highlighting things. The common denominator is that both sets of patients in 1 and 2 have high LDLP. What I'm going to attempt to show you today is that once adjusted for particle number, particle size has no statistically significant relationship to cardiovascular risk. But first, some geometry, which I think is a very important point, because I would always assume, okay, if I'm having something in my artery that is very big, then it is just worse than I'm having something that's really small. But of course, if you're having a lot of small things in your artery, then it is still gonna just not be good. At the same concentration of cholesterol within LDL particles, assuming the same ratio of CE to TG, it is mathematically necessary the person on the right case, the second, has more particles and therefore has greater risk. I see. It is mathematically necessary. Okay. Only when you do this, you can see that the relation between size and event vanishes. The only thing that matters is the number of LDL particles, large, small, or mixed. Doesn't quite matter then. Pretty interesting. Around Q 42,006, for example, last 3 months of 2006, it's quarter, I guess. Quarter 4th of 2006. I see. One of these variables began to deviate from the others. The details aren't important, but the point is one variable began to suggest home prices would fall while the others all pointed to a continued price. Prior to quarter 4 2006, these parameters were said to be concordant. They all predicted the same thing, either up or down. By 2007, they became discordant. Yes, one variable said the sky was falling, while others said everything was fine. When all of the variables are concordant, their accuracy is prophetic, as was the case from the mid-1990s until late 2006. When some variables become discordant with each other, especially variables that were historically concordant with each other, really bad stuff happens. What does concordant mean? Roughly concordant, in harmony, in music, corresponding in direction with the planes of something when it comes to geology, and when it comes to medicine, of twins inheriting the same genetic characteristics. I see. While other factors are likely to be involved, the pathogenesis of atherosclerosis, for example, or e.g., endothelial health, normal versus abnormal inflammatory response, the primary driver of atherosclerosis is the number of ApoB trafficking lipoproteins in circulation, of which LDL particles are the vast majority. LDLP is driving atherosclerosis risk, not LDLC. If LDLP and LDLC were equally bad, even when discordant, you would expect the blue line to be as steep as the red line and both to be steeper than the black line, but this is not the case. The problem is they don't say which line they're talking about. So you might understand, but I don't. In fact, though, not statistically significant, the higher risk group was high LDLP and actually has low LDLC. I'll give you a hint of why below. While the lowest risk group has low LDLP and not low LDLC. Interesting. The highest risk and lowest risk groups are those with discordant LDLC and LDLP. The high risk group has high LDLP and low LDLC, while the low risk group has high LDLC with low LDLP. It's the exact same thing as they have been talking about above, but I don't judge. I don't judge you. The discordance between LDLP and LDLC is exacerbated in patients with metabolic syndrome. In the patients without metabolic syndrome, LDLC underpredicts cardiac risk 22% of the time, consistent with the population data I have shown you earlier. However, when you look at the patients with metabolic syndrome, you can see that 63% of the time the risk of cardiac disease is underpredicted, again, not a typo. These data were collected from nearly 2,000 patients with diabetes who presented with perfect standard cholesterol numbers, LDLC being lower than 70 milligrams per deciliter and HDLC bigger than 40 milligrams per deciliter, and TG again lower than 150 milligrams per deciliter. However, only in 20% of the cases were their LDLP concordant with LDLC. This is in only 22% of cases that these patients have an LDLP level below 700 nmol or nanomole, whatever, per liter. Remember, LDLC smaller than 70 milligrams per deciliter is considered very low risk in the 5th percentile. Yet, by LDLP, the real mark of risk, 35% of these patients had more than 1,000 nmol per liter and 7% were high risk. When you do this analysis with the same group of patients stratified with by less stringent LDLC criteria, e.g. lower than 100 milligrams per deciliter, the number of patients in the high-risk group is even higher. The real-world tragedy, 90 to 95% of physicians, including cardiologists, would bet their own lives that persons with an LDLC smaller than 70 milligrams per deciliter have no atherosclerotic or sclerotic risk. But apparently, as studies say, it's just not the case, and it is very important to point that out. It's not easy to read, but it is very important to point out. And so I do have to say, I know this is just my opinion, and it is something that I've been thinking about before. When some doctor tells me that I should be doing something, then I personally I'm always going to double check that on my own as well. The thing is, they are, of course, they have the education, they know what they're talking about. But the thing is, things change very quick. And if I can find studies that really, by just going through them and having a look at them and seeing that they actually are right, then why should I still be doing this? Why should I still be listening to those people, even though they do have the knowledge and they do certainly think they know what they're talking about? And I just also don't want to blame any doctor or something, and I also don't want to judge anybody because they're human beings as well. And I just want to point out something. I just got a really nice message from a buddy of mine. He said, and this is a quote now, "I'm looking forward to see you. And I am also really looking forward to seeing him as well. Really, really, really a lot. Gonna be a good time. I hope." So the thing is, for me, I always like to double check things. And I don't know, like, this is just how I'm doing things and how I just deal with things. If you're just doing it differently, then yes, I'm totally fine with that as well. But I don't know. I kind of always have to check things for myself and on my own, whether it is actually the case or whether it is just something they talk about, even though they don't really know what they're talking about. Anyway, LDL-C fails to even reasonably predict cardiovascular disease in a patient population sick enough to show up in a hospital with chest pain or outright myocardial infarction. I don't know what this means. But yeah, it is fucked up. This is what I know. With respect to laboratory medicine, two markers that have a high correlation with a given outcome are concordant. They equally predict the same outcome. However, when the two tests do not correlate with each other, they are said to be discordant. LDLP or ApoB is the best predictor of adverse cardiac events, which has been documented repeatedly in every major cardiovascular risk study. LDL-C is only a good predictor of adverse cardiac events when it is concordant with LDLP. Otherwise, it is a poor predictor of risk. There is no way of determining which individual patient may have discordant LDL-C and LDLP without measuring both markers. Discordance between LDL-C and LDLP is even greater in populations with metabolic syndrome, including patients with diabetes. Important. If indeed LDLP is always as good in most cases, better than LDL-C at predicting cardiovascular risk, why do we continue to measure or calculate LDL-C at all? This is a good question. And I think this is a question that we can often ask, like, why are we still doing something then? And often there is no real answer. After 2 years in the Nyakan group, as expected, had experienced a significant increase in plasma HDL-C, along with some other benefits like a greater reduction in plasma triglycerides. However, there was no improvement in patient survival. The trial was futile and the Data and Safety Board halted the trial. In other words, for patients with cardiac risk and LDL-C levels at goal with medication niacin, despite raising HDL-C and lowering TG, did nothing to improve survival. This was another strike against the HDL hypothesis. This study found, consistent with the trials Eve discussed above, that any genetic polymorphism that seems to raise HDL-C does not seem to protect from heart disease. That is, patients with higher HDL-C due to a genetic alteration did not seem to have protection from heart disease as a result of that gene. This suggests that people with high or low HDL-C who get coronary artery disease may well have something else at play. I see. I don't necessarily understand, but I see. Unpublished data from the MESA trial found that the correlation between HDL-C and HDLP was only 0.73%, which is far from good enough to say HDL-C is perfect proxy or a perfect proxy for HDLP. A rise in HDL-C seems to disproportionately result from an increase in large HDL particles. In other words, as HDL-C rises, it doesn't necessarily mean HDLP is rising at all, and certainly not as much. For increase in HDL-C at lower levels, for example below 50 milligrams per deciliter, the increase in small particles seems to... I, by the way, hope that it is deciliters, it's DL, but I think it is. The increase in small particles seems to account for much of the increase in total HDLP, while for increases over 50 milligrams per deciliter, the increase in large particles seems to account for the increase in HDL-C. Also note that as HDL-C rises above 45 milligrams per deciliter, there's almost no further increase in total HDLP. The rise in HDL-C is driven by enlargement of the HDL particle, more cholesterol per particle, and not the drop in small HDLP. Yeah, large HDL particles may be less protective and even dysfunctional in certain pathological states, whereas small to medium-sized HDL particles seem to confer great protection through the following mechanism: greater antioxidant activity, greater inflammatory activity, and greater cholesterol efflux capacity, greater anti-thrombotic properties. And yes, thrombosis, if it is the right English word, I don't know, is a fucked up thing. Is it actually? It's actually not that much, so we are probably going to be able to finish up with this one today. The punchline: a serum HDL-C level has no known relationship to this complex process of RZT. The last thing a HDL does is lose its cholesterol. The old concept that a drug of lifestyle that raises HDL-C is improving the RCT process is wrong. It may or may not be affecting that dynamic process. Instead of calling this RCT, it would be more appropriately called ApoA1, trafficking of cholesterol. I and many others far more knowledgeable would argue that if statins and other drugs were used to lower LDLP and ApoB instead of LDL-C, their efficacy would be even greater. The same is true for dietary intervention. Authors found that an increase in the number of HDL particles and smaller HDL particles decreased the risk of cardiovascular disease. The problem with the HDL hypothesis is that it is using the wrong marker of HDL. By looking at HDL-C instead of HDL-P, these investigators may have missed the point. Just like LDL, it is all about the particles. It's all about the particles. 50% of people with heart disease have normal traditional lipid values. What do I mean by this? Most risk calculators, e.g. Framingham, take their inputs, e.g. age, gender, LDL-C, HDL-C, smoking, diabetes, blood pressure, and calculate a 10-year risk score. If you've ever played with these models, you'll quickly see that age drives risk more than any other input. First, there is no long-term studies either in primary or secondary prevention examining the exact question we want to know the answer to with respect to the role of dietary intervention on cardiovascular disease. There are short-term studies, some of which I will highlight, which look at proxies for cardiovascular disease, but all of the long-term studies looking at secondary prevention are either drug studies or multiple intervention studies. For example, or e.g. cholesterol lowering drugs plus blood pressure reducing drugs plus dietary intervention plus exercise plus whatever. Second, everything we have learned to the date on the risk relationship between cardiovascular disease and risk markers is predicted on the assumption that a risk marker of level X in a person on diet A is the same as it would be for a person on diet B, which is complete bullshit, I think. But yeah. Since virtually all of the thousands of subjects who have made up the dozens of studies that form the basis for our understanding on this topic were consuming some variant of the standard American diet, which means high carb, it is quite possible that what we know about risk stratification is that this population is not entirely fit for extrapolation to a population on a radically different diet. 25% of total energy in the form of sugar is not as extreme as you might think. For a person consuming 2,400 calories per day, this amounts to about 120 pounds per year of sugar, which is slightly below the average consumption of annual sugar in the United States. It's actually not that bad. Really not that bad. What was most interesting about this study was the clear difference between the three groups that was not solely a function of fructose load. In other words, the best outcome from a disease risk standpoint was in the glucose group, while the worst outcome was not in the all fructose group, but in the 50-50, technically 55 and 45 mixed group. This is a very powerful indicator that while glucose and fructose alone can't be deleterious in excess, their combination seems synergistically bad. I've pronounced it wrongly, I know. It is very difficult to make the case that when carbohydrates in general and sugar in particular are removed or greatly reduced in the diet, insulin resistance is not improved even in the presence of high amounts of saturated fats. When insulin resistance improves, for example, as we become more insulin sensitive, we are less likely to have the signs and symptoms of metabolic syndrome. As we meet fewer criteria of metabolic syndrome, our risk of not only heart disease but also stroke, cancer, diabetes, and Alzheimer's disease goes down. This is one of the reasons why I stick to low GI food and fruits, and actually a very low amount of fruits. And I've seen this, that they not yesterday, but the day before, that when I'm eating quite a lot of fruits, since I'm having a fructose intolerance, that I really don't feel that good anymore. And I really get bloated. I really just, my ass smells like shit. It's insane, to really be honest. And I've seen like maybe I should just not be doing this, which just really just comes in handy because, lower amount of carbs, a little bit leaner and stuff like that. But yeah, I have to just really take in the calories in another way, I guess. The consumption of sugar, fructose, high fructose corn syrup increases plasma levels of triglycerides, VLDL and ApoB, and reduces plasma levels of HDLC and ApoA1. The removal of sugar reverses each of these, and I don't consume any sugars as well. The consumption of fructose alone, though likely in dose-dependent fashion, has a similar, though perhaps less harmful impact as that of fructose and glucose combined. For example, sugar. The addition of fat in the absence of sugar and starch does not raise serum glycerides or other biomarkers of cardiovascular disease. So apparently, fat is not our enemy, but rather it is carbs, as kind of he points out. But yeah, I hope that I've been able to just share some things that are of importance to you. I think I'm gonna search for another book on health because, I mean, it is a very dangerous topic and also a very dangerous thing to talk about, but it's very interesting to me. And also the whole diet thing, it's just such an important part in my life, actually, and such an interesting part in my life for me. And I do really care about my nutrition and stuff. And so it would be kind of an interesting thing to really know what's up and what I should be doing and stuff like that. But yeah, I wish you the best health, happiness, and also success, and also hope that you're going to remain yourself and you're going to be remembered, which basically means your legacy and basically means just being a nice person. And then also being remembered as a nice person, which is a pretty cool thing. But yeah, 3 other questions that I have you are: why are you here? What are you trying to change? And what is bothering you the most? These 3 questions hopefully going to show you your purpose and maybe even a business idea, which is a pretty cool thing. One other question that I have for you is: what could you do? What could you say? What could you change that is really gonna, but especially say, that is really gonna change somebody's life? And because I totally believe that we all are able to do so, I just really believe that. I really do. But yeah, hopefully we're gonna see you next time. Bye, and thank you very much for going through this with me. As I said, I just really truly hope from the bottom of my heart that I've been able to just share some things that are of importance for you. And so yeah, gonna see you the next time. Thank you. Bye. Stay generous, kind, and patient, and we're gonna see you. As always, because this is what we do.